The beacon came in broken. It arrived at Earth's deep space relay station the same way most forgotten things arrive quietly, without ceremony, buried under 10,000 other signals. It had been traveling for 6 weeks through dead space, bouncing off 3 relay buoys, losing pieces of itself along the way. By the time it landed in the queue, it was little more than noise with a heartbeat. Benji Ajora almost deleted it. He was 12 hours into a 14-hour shift, running on bad coffee and the kind of tiredness that sits behind the eyes. The signal had no standard origin tag, no species identifier, no priority code. It should have gone straight to the archive. His finger hovered over the key. He pressed play instead. What came out of his speakers was not language, not at first. It was rhythm. A clicking, rising, falling pattern that the translation software could not fully catch. But underneath the clicks there was something else, a frequency that the software flagged in pale yellow text on his screen. It read, "Detected biological distress markers, cross-species confidence 91%. Benji sat up straight. He ran it through the deep filter. The translation came back partial and rough, full of gaps marked by dashes, but the shape of it was clear enough. 14 species, 2 systems already gone, a third going dark as the message was recorded. The word that appeared most in the cleaned-up text was one that every translation engine across every language handled without error. Please. He filed it as priority read at 2:14 station time. By 300 it was on the desk of Earth Orbital Command. By 400 it was in front of Admiral Rana Akafer, who read the transcript twice without blinking, then asked for the audio. She listened to Elder Toon's voice for 4 minutes and 20 seconds. The clicks and the pauses. The long silence near the end where something in the recording shifted and the translator offered a single word in brackets, weeping. Akafer set the file down. She looked out the narrow viewport beside her desk at the dark between stars. Then she opened her comm. The Galactic Relations Council met at 700 and the argument started before everyone had taken their seats. The Vreth Dominion, they said, not a small problem, not a border skirmish. The Vreth had been expanding for 40 years without a single successful counterpush. They had not attacked human territory. They were not yet a human problem. Akafer sat at the far end of the table and let them talk. A counselor named Dresh laid out the risk model. Sending a fleet into Vreth-contested space without treaty backing, without Galactic Council approval, without even a formal request from a recognized allied government. It was the kind of move that started longer wars. The kind of move that brought consequences home. Akafer waited until Dresh finished. Then she asked one question. She asked how long it would take the Vreth to reach the outer Sorvian shelters at their current rate of advance. Dresh checked his data. 11 days, he said. Akafer nodded. She told the council she needed 8 to get there. She said she was asking as a courtesy, not a request. She said if they wanted to formally object they were welcome to do so in writing, and she would read it when she returned. She left the room before the vote was called. The fleet moved out before noon. 12 warships, 3 carrier vessels, 2 medical ships, and a logistics train that stretched for 2 kilometers. 41,000 personnel, enough firepower to rearrange a moon. Sergeant Davo Lund stood on the loading deck of the carrier Ardent and watched the last supply crates come up the ramp. He had done this before, not this exact thing, but the shape of it. The quiet before something loud. He had a habit of counting things when the waiting got heavy. He counted crates. He got to 64 and the ramp sealed. Specialist Priya Nair was already in the medical bay, pulling up everything the Galactic Archive had on Sorvian biology. It was not much. The Sorvians were catalogued as Class II sapients, insectoid frame, hive-adjacent social structure but fully individual in consciousness. Their medical files were thin. She started building something thicker. She worked for 6 hours without stopping, and when she finally looked up, the stars outside the porthole were different ones. In the Sorvian cluster, Elder Toon sat in the dark of what had once been a council chamber and was now a shelter. Around him, his people moved quietly. Too quietly. The young ones did not make the sounds they used to make. The old ones had stopped trying to calculate how many days were left. The distress signal had been sent 17 days ago. No one had ever sent a distress signal to Earth before. His advisor, a young Sorvian named Vale who had not slept in 4 days, came to him with a data pad. She told him the relay network had registered a response ping from the direction of the Sol system. Faint. Automated. The kind of thing that could mean anything or nothing. Toon looked at the ping for a long time. He did not let himself feel anything yet. Hope was a weight his people could not carry right now, but he noted the direction of the signal. He noted the timestamp, and when Vale asked him what it meant, he told her he did not know. He told her they would wait. Outside, somewhere past the edge of safe space, something with 41,000 heartbeats was moving toward them very fast. There is a document in the Galactic Species Registry that most civilizations never bother to read in full. It is long and dry and mostly written in bureaucratic shorthand. But on page 47, under Class 9 planetary designations, there is a single entry that has a permanent red border around it. The border is not standard formatting. Someone added it manually, decades ago, after the third survey team failed to return from the third attempt to catalog Earth's northern landmass. The entry simply reads, "Do not send biological TEAMS. Do not initiate contact PROTOCOLS without command AUTHORISATION. Species status sapient, uncontrolled, extreme biohazard potential." Ambassador Foss had read that entry. He had read it 3 times in the past hour. He stood at the viewport of the refugee convoy ship Sorrow of Geld and watched the human fleet decelerate into formation around them. 12 warships. He had expected something crude, functional, military gray. What he saw was ships that looked like they had been built by people who wanted the enemy to see them coming and feel something cold in the stomach before the first shot was fired. Angled, dark, bristling with weapons that pointed in too many directions at once. His aide, a nervous Geldi named Paul, told him the human admiral was requesting a coordination channel. Foss said he needed a moment. He used that moment to read page 47 one more time. The channel opened anyway. Admiral Akhafer's voice came through clean and direct, no pleasantries, no ceremonial greeting. She told him she needed the convoy's current heading, full passenger count by species, medical status of critical cases, and the last known position of the Vreth advance fleet. She said she would need all of this in the next 20 minutes. Foss asked her if she understood the political complexity of the situation. She told him she understood there were sick people on his ships and an enemy fleet 8 days out, and that political complexity could wait until both of those things were resolved. Foss sent her the data. The first humans came aboard the convoy ship for medical coordination an hour later. Specialist Nair led a team of 4. Foss had stationed himself near the docking corridor to observe. He expected soldiers. What he got were 4 people in gray uniforms carrying equipment cases, moving quickly, not looking at the alien faces watching them with open fear. Nair stopped in the middle of the corridor, looked at the crowd of Sorvian refugees parting nervously around her, and did something Foss had not anticipated. She crouched down to the floor. She opened her kit. She took out a small wrapped food ration and set it on the ground in front of a Sorvian child that had frozen in the middle of the corridor, too afraid to move. She did not reach toward the child. She did not speak. She just set the ration down and moved on. The child stared at it for a long time, then it picked it up. Foss watched this and said nothing. Down on the lower cargo level, Sergeant Lund was overseeing the transfer of emergency power cells when he heard a sound from behind a stack of sealed containers. A small sound, like something trying very hard not to breathe loudly. He had heard that kind of sound before, in rubble, in collapsed buildings, in the aftermath of things he tried not to think about too often. He did not call out. He did not reach for anything. He just walked to the crates, sat down on the floor with his back against them, and started working through a field maintenance checklist out loud. Simple things, boring things, the kind of steady human noise that does not threaten anything. After 11 minutes, a small set of Sorvian mandibles appeared at the edge of the crate. Then eyes. Then the rest of Vale, who was 14 years old and had not spoken to anyone in 6 days. Lund did not look directly at her. He kept reading his checklist. He got to item 32 and asked, without turning his head, whether she had eaten anything today. A long pause, then a very small click that his translator rendered as, "Not today." He reached into his vest, produced 2 ration bars and set one beside him without looking. He kept reading. After a moment, the ration bar disappeared. That was all that happened, but something about it settled into the walls of the ship and stayed there. In the Vreth command vessel, High Commander Draz received the intelligence report and read it with the same expression he gave all reports. Flat, unmoved. He had beaten back 15 species coalitions in his career. He had ended 2 civilizations and paused 3 others. The idea that a single Deathworlder fleet from a planet that had never fought an interstellar war would change anything in his campaign was not something he considered seriously. He marked the report as low priority. He did not read page 47. The Vreth ultimatum arrived as text only. No voice, no visual, no officer's seal. Just words on a screen, the way you might leave a note for someone you do not consider worth the time of a real conversation. It read, "You are in contested space. You have no treaty standing here. Withdraw your vessels within 6 hours or they will be removed for you." Akafir read it once. She handed the pad to her navigation officer and asked him to plot intercept solutions on the Vreth Advanced Squadron. She did not send a reply to the ultimatum. She did not send anything at all. Ambassador Foss, watching from the coordination channel, asked her what her response would be. She told him she was already composing it. The Vreth came in formation clean, practiced, the kind of arrangement that had worked against 30 other fleets. They outnumbered the humans 2-to-1 in ship count and expected the gap to show immediately. The Vreth doctrine was pressure and speed. Push hard on the front, force a retreat, chase the retreat into disorder, finish the disorder. It had worked 31 times. The human fleet did not retreat. Foss stood at his viewport with Paul beside him and watched things he had no framework for. The human ships moved in ways that should not have been efficient, tight, fast, overlapping fields of fire, every ship covering the gaps in the next ship's armor. When the Vreth concentrated fire on one vessel, 2 others moved to absorb the angle. When one human ship took a hull hit and slowed, it did not fall back. It pushed sideways, found a new line, and kept firing. Paul kept asking what the humans were doing. Foss kept telling him he did not know. The Vreth fired a spread meant to separate the human formation. The human formation did not separate. It compressed. It got smaller and tighter, and then it accelerated directly into the spread through the fire, into the Vreth front line at close range where the Vreth ships were not designed to fight. The Vreth had range weapons, long sight lines, space to maneuver. The humans had taken all of that space away in under 4 minutes. At close range, in the tight chaos of the engagement, something in the human fleet changed. They moved faster. They shot more accurately. They seemed to become more themselves rather than less. Foss realized, watching this, that the humans were more dangerous when they were frightened. That fear did not slow them. It focused them into something very sharp and very specific, like a tool that only reaches its proper shape under pressure. He had never seen anything like it. The Vreth squadron broke formation at the 40-minute mark. Not a retreat, a fracture. Ships pulling different directions without coordination, each one trying to find space to operate and finding a human ship already there. Draz watched his advance force scatter and for the first time in his career issued a hold order. He still did not consider it a defeat. He called it a repositioning. But in the refugee convoy, the watching aliens saw something else entirely. Nair was in the medical bay when the battle ended, working on a Sorvian elder whose respiratory injury had worsened in the stress of the engagement. The elder kept trying to ask her what was happening outside. She told him without looking up from her work that they had held the line. He asked if any humans had been hurt. She paused, just briefly, and told him yes. He reached out and touched her arm with one of his secondary limbs, a very light touch. His mandibles moved slowly in the pattern that Nair had learned meant sorrow. She patted his hand and kept working. Lund came back to the cargo level afterward with a gash along his left forearm that he had not bothered to have treated yet. He had been on a supply coordination run that got complicated when a docking corridor lost pressure, and the team had to work in suits for 2 hours. He sat down near the usual stack of crates and began the maintenance checklist again, because his hands needed something to do. Vale appeared from the crates in 3 minutes this time instead of 11. She looked at his arm. Her mandibles moved very quickly. Her translator box produced, "You are damaged." Lund looked at it and said it was not too bad. Vale disappeared back into the crates. She came back holding a piece of clean wrapping material she had clearly torn from somewhere she was not supposed to. She held it out toward him and then stopped, unsure. Lund held out his arm. She wrapped it carefully, too carefully, with the focused concentration of someone doing something that mattered to them very much. He thanked her. She clicked twice quickly and the translator gave him, "It is correct to help." He thought about that for a while after she had gone back to the crates. It is correct to help. He had heard a lot of justifications in his career for the things soldiers did and did not do: duty, orders, nation, unit. He had never heard it put that simply before from a 14-year-old alien in a refugee convoy, and he found that it was better than most of the others. Outside in the dark, Draaz was already planning the next move. He was done repositioning. The fleet went quiet after the first battle. Not silent, there was always noise on warships, always the hum of systems and the voices of crew and the mechanical sounds that large vessels make when they are carrying a great deal of weight across a great deal of space. But a different kind of quiet settled in. The kind that comes after something has been spent and has not yet been replaced. On the Ardent, in a corridor near the secondary docking arm, 7 soldiers stood in a row with their hands at their sides and their heads down. There were no words read aloud. No ritual object passed between them. They stood together for 4 minutes in complete stillness, and then they went back to their posts. Vale saw this from the junction where she had been sent to carry a message to the docking coordinator. She stood very still herself and watched them the whole time. When the last one had gone, she remained in the junction for another minute, alone, looking at the empty corridor where they had been. She asked Lund about it later. She found him in his usual place, running calibrations on equipment that did not need calibrating. She asked him what the soldiers had been doing. He told her they were honoring people who were gone. She processed this and asked if humans did this every time. He said yes, every time. She was quiet for a moment. Then she told him the Sorvian way was different. The Sorvian way was to say the name of the lost one out loud in a group once, and then never say it again, so that the name could rest. She told him it was very hard to hold all the names that could not be said anymore. Lund set down his calibration tool. He looked at her properly for the first time in the conversation, and said that sounded very heavy. She said it was. He asked if she had names she was holding. A long pause, 7 clicks in a specific rhythm. The translator did not render it as words, it just said, affirmative multiple. Lund nodded once. He picked up the calibration tool again and did not ask anything else. But he moved slightly to the left on the container he was sitting on, making space that he did not need for any practical reason. Vale sat beside him. That was the whole conversation, but it was also not nothing. Elder Toon found Admiral Okafa in the narrow observation bay of the convoy ship, where the two vessels had maintained a permanent docking link for coordination. Okafa was standing at the viewport looking at nothing in particular. Toon had asked for this meeting with no stated purpose, which was a Sovian signal for needing to say something that had no easy category. He told her he did not understand why the humans were here. She turned and looked at him. She waited. He said his people had nothing to offer Earth. No resources, no strategic position, no alliance value. The Sovian cluster was small and its civilizations were not powerful. Helping them carried enormous risk and no obvious reward. He had been trying to construct the logic of it for days and could not. He wanted her to explain it to him. Okafa was quiet for a moment. She looked back at the viewport. She told him there was an old idea on Earth. She said it had been put different ways by different people in different times, and that none of them had agreed on exactly how to say it. But the core of it was this. Some things needed doing, and the question of who would do them came down, in the end, to who was standing close enough to see that they needed doing. Toon was quiet for a long time. His mandibles moved slowly. He told her that in Soviet culture, the highest thing one being could say to another was, "I see your need and I do not look away." He said the closest approximation in standard tongue was something like witness, or perhaps, "You are real to me." He said his people saw the humans now. Whatever happened next, they saw them. Okafa nodded once slowly and turned back to the viewport. Toon stood beside her and they both looked at the dark without speaking, which was, in its own way, a kind of language. In his command vessel, Draaz was not standing at viewports or holding quiet moments. He was running projections. The human fleet had won the first engagement because of formation discipline and close-range aggression. His next move would account for both. He was not going to hit the fleet. He was going to hit the convoy. Species that fought hard to protect others, he had learned, could be more easily broken by going around them to the thing they were protecting. It was efficient. It was clean. It had worked before. He set the strike time for 300 ship time. The human rest cycle, according to galactic biological records, was deepest in the early pre-dawn hours. He had read a lot of documents. He had not read the one that noted humans do not sleep well before a fight. He had not read the note that Specialist Nair had flagged 3 hours earlier, an anomalous power signature reading on the long-range array that she thought looked unusual. He had not read it because it was her note, filed quietly into the human fleet's internal logs. But Okafa had read it. She had read it at 100, and she had not gone to sleep at all. The Vreth came out of dark space at 2:58. 2 minutes early. Draaz had moved his timetable forward after a navigation correction, a small change, not significant. He could not have known it would matter. He could not have known that Okafa had placed 2 scout drones in the approach corridor, and that when those drones registered mass displacement at 2:57, she already had 17 warships in motion. The Vreth strike force came in fast and aimed directly at the convoy. 40 ships, more than twice what they had sent before. Draaz had decided that if the human fleet was going to absorb fire and keep moving, the answer was enough fire that absorbing it became impossible. What he had not planned for was that the human fleet was not in front of the convoy. It was around it. Okafa had not placed her ships in a defensive line where they could be targeted cleanly. She had placed them in a sphere, every angle covered, every ship hull closed to a convoy vessel it was assigned to protect. To hit the convoy ships, the Vreth had to go through a human warship first. There was no clean angle. There was no gap. The Vreth opened fire on the sphere. The sphere fired back. In the corridors of the convoy ship carrying the Soviet refugees, the impact tremors came like waves through the floor. Refugees pressed against walls. Children were held close. The lights went amber and the emergency system came on and said, in 11 languages, to move to interior shelter. Lund's squad was already inside. They had been inside since 100. Lund stood at the junction of 2 main corridors with 5 soldiers, and the specific calm of someone who had decided, a long time ago, what kind of person they were going to be when things went bad. His team had distributed themselves through the ship's key corridors. They were not there to fight unless fighting came to them. They were there because sometimes the presence of someone who is not afraid, or who is afraid and does not show it, makes frightened people believe that being frightened is survivable. Vale found him at the junction. She had not gone to shelter. He started to say something and she looked back at him with an expression her translator could not render, but that he understood completely, someone who had decided to stop running. He moved left on the corridor wall. She stood beside him. A hull breach opened on the lower deck at 3:11. Not a Vreth boarding, a structural failure under weapon impact. A 3-meter tear in the outer plating that dropped the pressure in the lower loading bay fast. 3 human soldiers and a Soviet maintenance crew of 5 were in that bay. The soldiers got to the breach kit first, but the kit was designed for 2-person operation, and the structural foam required a second set of hands at a precise angle. The Soviet workers understood immediately. They did not wait to be asked. 2 of them took positions that the kit diagram did not specify for non-human anatomy and held the foam applicator at exactly the right angle, holding it steady through the shaking of the ship, while the human soldiers worked the seals. The breach closed in 8 minutes. Standard repair time was 14. No one had told the Soviets how to help. They had watched and understood and done it. Outside, the battle reached a point that Draws had not anticipated. The human sphere was not breaking. His fire was absorbed and returned and absorbed again, and the sphere did not thin, did not show gaps, did not lose cohesion. He increased firing intensity. The human ships took hits. Some of them showed visible hull damage. None of them moved away from their convoy vessel. He was running a standard war against something that was not running a standard war. A rational fleet pulled its damaged ships back. Human ships with the worst damage pushed forward hardest. He had no entry in his doctrine for that. The Geldy medical ship, positioned deep in the convoy, lost its engine assist at 3:23. It began to drift outward from the sphere's protection. Okafa saw it on her display. She had 1 ship free to respond. The destroyer held line, already carrying 2 hull fractures and running on 60% power. Held line moved to cover the medical ship without being ordered. Its captain had seen the drift and acted. Okafa saw this and said nothing because there was nothing to say. The ship was where it needed to be. Foss was in the medical ship when held line drew up alongside. He looked through the porthole at the damaged human vessel sitting deliberately between his ship and the Vreth fire. He thought about page 47. He thought it had been written by people who had never seen what the thing they feared would do when given a reason to act. At 3:41, Okafa committed her reserve ships in a maneuver she had been holding since 2:57. The gas giant at the edge of the system had a charged debris field in its upper atmosphere that made standard sensors unreliable. She had placed 6 ships in that field at the start of the engagement, running silent. They came out now, at full speed, directly into the rear of the Vreth formation. The Vreth formation had no rear guard. Draws had not expected to need one. The formation collapsed in 11 minutes. Ships scattered in 4 directions. Draws, in his command vessel, called an emergency extraction. He would call it a tactical withdrawal in his report. His officers would not correct him. But all of them had read page 47 now in their heads, and all of them were thinking the same thing. They had not read far enough. 3 days after the battle, a formal document arrived through the Galactic Arbitration Network. It was addressed to the Soviet Cluster Coalition, the Geldy Diplomatic Assembly, and notably to the Human Fleet Command. It carried the Vreth Dominion's official seal, and used the specific legal language of ceasefire and claim suspension that, in galactic law, meant, "We are stopping." And we are recording that we stopped. In 31 previous campaigns, the Vreth had never filed such a document. Paul read it aloud to Foss twice. Foss sat with the same expression both times, a person trying to locate something inside themselves that they had not needed in a long time. He told Paul to send confirmation to all coalition partners. When Paul asked what to say in the message, Foss told him to say, "The ceasefire is received and witnessed." He chose the word witnessed deliberately. The fleet began preparing to leave. This was the part no one had thought about. The coming had been urgent, a signal, a choice, a fleet in motion. The leaving was slower and harder to name. The convoy ships and the warships had been docked and linked for 9 days. Medical teams had crossed back and forth so many times the crew manifests no longer quite matched which ship each person belonged to. On her last shift, she produced a data file she had been building since the first day, a full adapted medical guide for Sorvian physiology, cross-referenced with standard galactic treatments. She handed it to the senior Sorvian healer, a quiet elder named Orath who had spent 6 days watching Nair's hands when she worked, learning by looking. Orath held the data file and was still for a moment. Then he placed one secondary limb very gently on top of Nair's hand and pressed once. She had learned that press. It meant, "This is received as a gift." He made a soft sound the tablet rendered as, "It is good to have been seen." Lund's last conversation with Vale happened near the cargo crates, where it had always happened. He told her the fleet was leaving at 1800. She said she knew. He asked if she was going to be all right. She took a long time with this question, longer than the translation needed, and then said that she thought she would be, eventually, in the way that things which have been broken can sometimes still work. He said he thought that was right. She reached into the fold of her carrier wrap and produced a small woven object. It was about the size of a fist, made of layered fibers in deep blue and gray, interlocked in a pattern that looked random but was clearly not. She held it out. He took it carefully. He asked what it was. She said it was a remembrance weave. She said among her people it was made to count someone as belonging to the group. It was given to someone to say, "You are in our count now. You exist in our number. When we say how many of us there are, you are part of that number." Lund looked at the weave for a while. Then he folded his hand around it. He said thank you. Not in the way people say thank you when they mean something small, in the way they say it when they mean the thing exactly. Vale clicked 3 times rapidly, which her translator did not attempt. Some sounds did not carry across languages. He had told her once that was all right. He thought he understood anyway. Elder Toon spoke to the fleet through an open channel at 1700. He said he had tried many times to compose this address and failed, because there was no proper form for what he was trying to say. There was no category in Sorvian culture for what the humans had done. He said, "We called into the dark, not knowing what would hear us. What heard us came. What came did not ask what it would receive in return. What came stood in front of our people and did not move." He paused for a long time. He said, "We do not have the word for this. We will have to make one." The fleet left at 1804, 4 minutes late due to a fuel calibration on the Ardent that needed a manual check. It felt right that the leaving had one ordinary thing in it. The convoy ships watched them go. Hundreds of faces at hundreds of portholes, different shapes and different numbers of eyes, all facing the same direction. Vale stood at a porthole with the wrapper from a ration bar folded small in her secondary hand, something she had kept since the first day, and watched until there was nothing left to watch. Somewhere much farther across the galaxy in a small system that had been watching its own borders for 3 years, a relay station picked up an unusual broadcast. It was Elder Toon's voice, rebroadcast on the open galactic channel, not a distress call, not a treaty statement, but a testimony. What had happened? Who had come? what they had done. The station's operator was a young HFY archivist who had been afraid for a long time. She listened to the whole thing twice. Then she sat for a while and looked at the stars through the station's narrow window, the ones that had been looking threatening for 3 years, the ones she had been watching with a growing certainty that no one would come in time. She was still afraid, but the fear had a different shape now. It had a door in it. She filed Toon's testimony in the public archive under the heading, Witness Account, unprompted. She added one tag of her own, outside standard categories, because she felt it was accurate. The tag read, They answered.